Hello everyone, so today we're going to be talking all about weight, the amount of weight, where the weight is in the car, how wide the weight is, everything to do with the weight. So let's start off by thinking about how weight is generally seen in motorsport like F1 or any sort of full-scale motorsport. There's a massive chase to reduce weight as much as possible, make your car as light as possible, things are compromised and put right on the limit to do anything possible to get the cars as light as physically possible, get down to that minimum weight limit. And why do they do that? What is the need to do that? Well, obviously if you've got a car with more weight in it, more mass, that means that it has more momentum. And that means that it requires more force to go from driving that way to driving that way. And that force has to come from the tyres. The problem is that the force of the tyres doesn't increase enough when the weight is added to overcome that effect. So overall, your car is just slower in the corner since the tyres can't turn the car as effectively, basically. You can't decelerate as fast, you can't turn as fast through the corner, and you can't accelerate as fast out of it. So therefore, you're just slower. So what is it then in RC that you see people sort of add weight under their lipo, add, weight under their electrics, weight all over the place? Why does that make any sense? Well, in RC, everything is very different. Quite often the challenge actually isn't the max peak amount of grip you have in the corner. It can be bumps, it can be just lack of being able to drive your car quickly around that corner, because everything happens so much faster, we're so much less in control of them because of that. And we've got so much grip for the scale of them. They're very light for the scale of them. It's all just very different, and that brings weight into play. So why and when would you add weight to your car? So to me, it always feels like when I add weight, the car's just number in basically every sense of the word. Everything happens a little bit slower. You've got more time to react. Bumps don't affect it half as badly. And yeah, your car's just going to be a lot more consistent to drive because it's not affected as much by sort of surface differences on the track, bumps on the track, things like that. So the times you kind of do it is, say you go out in like practice 1 or practice 2, because practice 1 you're probably going to feel a bit uncomfortable anyway normally. But say everything just feels like it's just happening too much. Your car's just like sort of just wobbling everywhere. You just feel like you have no control over it. It's like finding its own way through bumps, everything. That can be a very good time to add weight, and especially high grip as well, because high grip can it's not as much of an issue to have the weight in high grip because you've got enough grip to sail around the corner quickly anyway. And it just keeps your car deader and just less pointy and reactive, which is going to make it easier to drive. So yeah, it's those sort of days where you just feel out of control of your car. You need to just zen it all off a bit. Those are the days where you're going to want to add some weight to your car. And when would you remove weight from your car? Well, pretty much the opposite scenario to that. So usually when the grip is a little bit lower is the main one, you're probably going to want to take weight out of your car. So say if it's wet, we go for as light as possible in the wet on the minimum weight limit, because it goes back to that motorsport thing of the limit everywhere is certainly traction. And you're just going to have basically more overall traction if you don't have as much weight in your car. So in the wet, no weight on the limit. And as it gets lower grip towards that, what you can find if you've got too much weight in your car is it doesn't feel like it wants to square up out of the corners. It kind of just continues to wiggle because it just doesn't want to take off out of the corners because it's got that big lump of weight there holding it down. So yeah, it again doesn't want to turn in as much, doesn't want to exit the corner as much, and those are all things which, when it's low grip, you'd like them back. You'd like to be able to flick your car into the corner, slide a little bit, and then drive in a nice straight line out of them. So yeah, pretty much that is what the amount of weight does in your car. So now let's talk about the position of the weight. So we're leaving the weight the same, but moving it forwards and backwards. So that's things like brass front bulkhead, where your battery is, weight under the servo, not under the servo, C and D blocks being steel or something. So yeah, that type of thing. So How does that feel? Usually it feels to me like when there's more weight forwards, again the car is slightly slower to turn into the corner because you've got that weight there at the front to get turning, takes a little bit longer. But then sort of in the middle of the corner and the exit, just as you get back on power, you'll feel that you're going to have definitely more steering at those points. So more the middle and the exit of the corner. Because what happens is you get the drive at the rear, and that drive at the rear doesn't lift the front tyres as much since there's more weight at the front. And that just holds the front end more on the track and gives you definitely more just on power steering basically. So yeah, more weight nearer the front, slightly deader into the corner, but the mid and exit, you feel like you have more steering. The weight more at the rear is going to be the opposite of that. It usually feels like your car can flick into the corner a little bit harder, and then as you introduce the power again, it's going to drive in a straighter line. So that's very good for the sort of the lower grip conditions, almost where you start handbraking your car a little bit. You're coming into, like say, a tight hairpin and you want to get your car to flick in, and then you want it to drive out in a straight line. Weight more rearwards is really good for those lower traction conditions. In the high grip conditions, your car is already really nervous and aggressive into the corner, and then out of the corner you've got that much rear grip that you can almost be trying to wheelie and just understeering out the corners. So things like carpet, high grip Astro, it's really good to have that weight super far forward because that calms down the initial steering and then gives you the steering back in the mid and exit of the corner. Now let's talk about the spread of the weight. So obviously you can have a lot of weight all close to the centre of the car, kind of like the B7 concept with the motor further forward and stuff like that, and no weight in the front, all in the middle. And then you've got the other concept of a motor out the back with more weight down the front, kind of like an old sort of B4 or something like that, where you've got the motor right out the back, stick pack down the middle, and then maybe some like brass bulkhead or something in the front as well. That would be the other extreme. So what does it do having the weight closer or further apart? Well, what you're changing is effectively the inertia of the car in this direction. So if you have all of the weight closer to the middle, it's easier for the car to rotate around its centre of mass. Where if you have all the weight more spread, it makes this harder to do. It's almost like adding weight in a sense, but kind of in a bit of a different way. So yeah, how does that feel? Having all the weight closer to the middle is just going to be, yeah, more reactive into the corner. Your car can turn easier, start turning easier, and stop turning easier at the end of the corner. So you can start your car rotating faster and stop it rotating faster. So in theory, you should be able to get the corner done faster because you can be through it and out it before you know it. Spreading the weight, sometimes it can feel good to say add some weight to the front and the rear. Sometimes, kind of like I said with adding the weight in general, everything can just be happening too fast. You can have like some really long sweeping corners that are like really bumpy, and your car just sort of doesn't want to sit straight through that section and doesn't flow through it. In those scenarios, it can feel good to have more weight at either end of the car as well. So it's something that you can sort of play with. You can potentially get a feel of having a heavier car without actually having a heavier car if you spread the weight out a bit more. And you can definitely liven your car up by moving it back to the middle again. There is one other thing to watch out for with the weight, and that is sort of the width of the weight as well. So how I just talked about the spread of the weight front to back, that is also kind of relevant for the side to side, how wide that weight is in the car. And the main reason we need to think about that is because when you're moving your battery is the widest thing in the car. It's got that inertia from side to side. And when you move that forwards and backwards, that can very, very much change the feel of the car. And it's not just the weight bias necessarily, it's where you're putting that point of, where you're putting that momentum in roll forwards and backwards. So if you move that to the front, obviously there's going to be, the front of the car now has more inertia and the rear of the car would have more inertia if you moved it back. So that almost sometimes feels like it changes how the car drives more than the weight bias itself. So I've done that test before where I remember back when we had the B6.4, we always used to run a brass bulkhead and run the battery sort of somewhere near, I can't remember where we ran it, but we just ran it in a certain position. And then one time I remember I had like the corner weight pad things, And I set my car up so that it didn't have the brass bulkhead, but it had the battery like way further forward. And I worked it out so that it was the same weight bias. And I tested it back to back, and the whole car with the battery further forward just rolled so much more over the front end, like really, really over the front end everywhere. And when I changed it back, the car was just sat back again, rolled more where it was, just through the middle of the car. So something to watch out for when moving the battery is it really, really does feel like if you move the battery more rearwards, the rear of the car sort of becomes very active. And if you move it forwards, it can feel like the car really is sort of divey over the front. So it often feels like sometimes there is just a battery position which just works the best, and it doesn't even really make sense why, but that just works the best. And then we sometimes then use like stick-on weights in each end to actually get the effects I was sort of talking about earlier in the video, with getting sort of, you know, less initial but more mid and exit by like having more front weight. If your car's working well and rolling really nicely side to side, yeah, it can be worth just leaving your battery where it is and using like little stick-on weights or things like a servo weight or things like that to just actually tune the weight bias that way. So that is something to watch out for. Again, something maybe you can test and give it a go for yourself. And yeah, check out the website. We've got quite a lot of cool stuff on there. The B7's in stock now, so if you fancy a kit build of that, that's all on the website. There's more cool, exciting things on there as well. We've got a few little like parts and things like that that we're gonna come and that are gonna add there. So yeah, we'll see you in the next one.